I never thought that I would meet someone that opposed the VA loan, but then I forgot that Dave Ramsey does exist. What's up, guys? My name is McKeown. I'm a licensed real estate agent in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas and an investor. And to add to that as well, I am a Marine Corps veteran. So when I saw this video, I knew I needed to respond to it because, to be quite frank with you, I don't necessarily agree with a majority of what Dave Ramsey says here, and a few of the things that he does mention need to be corrected. But I will tell you, there is one instance where I do agree with Dave at the end. Now, before I jump into the video that Dave made, I will tell you I've used my VA loan twice. I've bought a duplex and I've also bought a quadplex about 2.5 years later, and both of those investments have been sold, and I've been able to graduate up to essentially 2 commercial buildings that combined value is close to about $3 million. So as far as real estate investing and getting your feet in the door, a VA loan is a huge asset.
I understand that you hate VA loans. Can you clarify as to kind of why?
Hate might be a strong term, but
So first things first, Dave mentioned that VA loans are expensive.
number one, the VA loans are more expensive with fees and interest rate than any of the big three, FHA, VA, or conventional.
Well, there are a couple things wrong with that, first of all. Now, when you're looking at a conventional loan and putting less than 20% down, as well as really any FHA loan, you're going to be looking at paying mortgage insurance. I can tell you right out the gate, with a VA loan, you do not pay any mortgage insurance. Now, if you've bought a home before, you are aware that you have to escrow. Again, if you are planning to escrow, you have to escrow insurance, and that's part of your closing costs. If you're not escrowing any because you don't have any mortgage insurance on a VA loan, that alone is going to have your closing costs lower. Second of all, if you look at the daily mortgage rates, really with any lender, they're going to be able to offer you a lower interest rate on an FHA loan, oftentimes because there are more fees associated with an FHA loan. Also, they're going to likely be able to give you a quite similar rate to an FHA loan with a VA loan. Now, if you look at conventional, you're actually going to be looking at a higher interest rate than what you would get if you went FHA or VA. Now, what he may be talking about is the funding fee that is associated with the VA loan and only the VA loan. Now, this can be an easy get by if you have any percentage of disability, 10% or above. You essentially get that waived. Now, the funding fee, if we want to get really complicated, can also start to get even more expensive if you're utilizing the VA loan for the second time. Now, this funding fee is something that you're not going to be paying with a conventional loan, and it's not going to be something you're paying with an FHA loan. So yes, there is an additional fee that only the VA loan carries, but as I mentioned before too, the VA loan does not carry any kind of mortgage insurance. It's not required, as opposed to a conventional and FHA loan where mortgage insurance, again, unless you're putting 20% down on a conventional loan or more, is going to be required. Now, to break all this down real simple for you guys, if you were to take a $300,000 loan with a conventional loan, an FHA loan, and a VA loan, and just had a loan estimate of all three from a very good lender that also does VA loans consistently, I can tell you the lowest amount of closing costs and the lowest amount of fees would be associated with the loan estimate of the VA loan. Now, the next thing that Dave brings to the table is the fact that a VA loan is a 0% down loan.
The reason most people gravitate towards a VA loan is you can get as you know, you can get a house with nothing down.
Yeah, and that's
which
kinda
means
what
you're
was
too
drawing me
dadgum
to it.
broke to buy a house.
I definitely wasn't rich when I bought that first house, my first duplex, and I certainly wasn't well off by the time I used my VA loan for the second time, 2.5 years later. But I can tell you, eventually down the road, probably in the next 2 to 3 years, I'm going to be buying a house between 2 and 3 million, utilizing my VA loan and taking advantage of all the perks the VA loan has. And yes, I'm going to be putting 0% down. Why? Because I'd rather have money in my pocket now that can go then generate me more income and pay a little bit more on my mortgage than maybe put $100,000, $250,000 down on a property that really is only going to make my mortgage slightly more affordable. Now, there are situations where veterans utilize their VA loan when really they probably shouldn't, or don't have a ton of cash and need the seller to credit them a ton of cash in order to actually close on the house. I'm not disagreeing that that may be a bad position to buy your first house, because as Dave mentioned, if your HVAC does go out next month, you're essentially going to have to put that on a credit card. But by no means does putting 0% down, utilizing your VA loan, and taking advantage of keeping that extra cash in your pocket mean that you're too broke to afford a home.
So I want you to have a house. I just don't want it to have you.
And what does that mean? That essentially means that if you buy a house and you don't have a ton of cash reserves and you wind up having to repair a ton of stuff, you wind up essentially going broke owning a house because you can't keep up with it. Or on the flip side, you wind up having to sell down the road much quicker than anticipated, and now you're over under on a house where you potentially have to get foreclosed on, or you just got to bring a significant amount of money that you've earned and have not put into the house to bring to the closing table to get the house sold. Now, a way to limit that is actually to technically invest in real estate. Buy a single family home and rent out the other 2 or 3 bedrooms. Utilize that VA loan and buy a duplex, buy a triplex, buy a quad, rent out the other units. A majority of that will cover your mortgage. That way, if hey, you're making $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month, you're not going to be paying a $2,500 mortgage where you have no savings whatsoever. You're essentially not paying a mortgage anymore because your tenants are. And if there are any issues that do pop up, you've got your salary, potentially some cash flow from the property to help pay for any of the expenses that pop up.
Causes people to buy a home when they're in a position of weakness rather than strength.
To be quite honest with you, there's not a ton difference from a 3% down conventional loan or maybe a 3.5% down FHA loan. I can't even count the amount of times that I've helped a first-time homebuyer utilize a conventional loan, putting 3% down and still needing help from the seller in order to come up with the money for closing. Same thing with a 3.5% down FHA loan. But again, I think it just goes back to how Dave sees real estate. He's wanting you to put 20, 30, 40, 50% down on a home, which in reality, especially with where home prices are now, it's just not realistic. Now, the next part of the video is actually kind of funny because I dealt with the same thing myself back in 2015 when I was moving to Texas. And I really didn't understand real estate at the time, especially how to buy a house. But what I did understand was the GI Bill was going to be paying me monthly to go to school on top of paying for my books and giving me a basically allowance for housing. I, at the time, assumed I could use that as far as qualifying income, which I will tell you, you cannot use. Okay, so if you're in school utilizing your GI Bill and wanting to buy a house off of just the GI Bill benefits, you cannot utilize that as far as income. That was me back in 2015. I wanted to buy a house when I went to school, rented out the rooms, and wouldn't pay my mortgage. And the funny thing is that was well before I even understood what house hacking was, what my VA loan offered me, so on and so forth. The unfortunate side of this is the learning curve that not a lot of us veterans get told or really educated on is the fact of the use of VA loan has to come from solid income. It either has to be a solid full-time job, or it has to be a business that you've owned and have filed 2 years of tax returns on and show profit, or it's got to be from disability. So if it's not one of those, if it is one of your GI Bill benefits, it's not going to be able to be used as far as valid income. So if you are looking to get out of the military, go to school, you are unfortunately going to have to rent. Now, there are other ways to go around it. You could partner with friends that, maybe are already working a full-time job and can qualify for a house. You can be on the note, you can be on the deed, and you can also help pay the mortgage. You're going to be equally responsible, but you yourself are not going to be able to qualify for the mortgage alone. So it really comes down to your level of sacrifice and how much you're willing to work, how much effort you're willing to do, and really how much you're willing to network and meet with other people to see how creative you can be when it comes to purchasing and utilizing your VA loan.
You buy a house with no money, a house is not a blessing.
Now, that's Dave's entire premises. He doesn't want you to be buying a house and being in a considerable amount of debt. He also doesn't believe in mortgages and the fact that they can be good debt. Now, if you go buy a super expensive house and fully leverage yourself to get the nicest house you possibly could afford, and you yourself only live in the house, it's probably not going to be the best route to utilize your VA loan. Now, on the flip side, if you buy a duplex or a quad or maybe a single family that needs some work and you've got some cash to remodel it, maybe you rent out the rooms or maybe rent out the other units of that multifamily, that is now an investment, and that is good debt. And that is something that Dave never mentions, never talks about, and doesn't want to educate you on because he and his whole ideology is about getting rid of all your debt as fast as you possibly can. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there is one thing that I agree with.
Well, I graduated in 4 years with a business degree from the University of Tennessee, and I worked 40 to 60 hours a week every week.
I actually have personal experience in this because I can tell you, I didn't bust my butt in college. I got out of the military, I got out of the Marine Corps, and played a ton of video games, and I worked on Sunday. Now, I got the benefit of all of my books paid for, all of my tuition paid for, got that monthly stipend that really covered all of my expenses, and then my fun money was made on Sunday. That allowed me to still have a social life, because I can tell you when I was in the Marine Corps, I did not have a social life. Now, if you've been following my story and you've been following my channel, you know it was because I was gambling every moment I possibly could when I was in the Marine Corps. So I wanted that flexibility. I wanted that space. I wanted that social life and fun. But I tell you what, I easily could have worked a full-time job anywhere 30, 40, 50 hours a week, made a whole lot more income, used that income to potentially qualify for a house. So if I did do that, there could have been a way I invest in real estate even earlier than at the age of 27, maybe at the age of 24 or 25. But again, at the time, I knew nothing when it came to a VA loan, anything real estate. And at the time, I wanted to be a math teacher, not a real estate agent. Now, I may not be a firm believer in a majority of what Dave has to say, but I do have to give my hats off to him. He's built a huge business around a lot of people that struggle with their finances. And I can tell you, he has endless amounts of reviews of people doing exactly what he tells them to do and getting out of debt when they never thought it was possible. But me personally, I believe in debt. I believe in good debt. I believe in investing and leveraging other people's money to further my money. Thanks again for watching, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe. It really does help. And stay tuned for the next video.